So, I ended my last video by talking about, how I've always been spiritually connected to God. God has always been there for me. He's always been there since day one, and I literally mean day one. Let me give you a little bit of backstory about me and how I got my name. Okay. So I was born January 17th. Okay. I am an 80s baby. So mom had to have a C-section with me. Okay, a repeat C-section. And they had to put her to sleep. For whatever reason, they had to put her to sleep. And dad was there. And I believe he was in the room. I can't remember verbatim, but he was sanctioned over once they got me out. He thought something was wrong. They call him over, Mr. James, come on over. He's thinking that there's a deformity or something. And they say, wow, look at your daughter. I mean, not look at your daughter, but, look at your child. And he's like, what's wrong with it? And he says, she has a veil. They say she has a veil. And he says, oh God. They said, do you know what this means? He says, yes, she's a special child. So for those of you who don't know, a child that is born with a veil, which is pretty much the amniotic sac, either over their face, still on their bodies, or they're just still in the womb. I'm not sure how it was, if I was partially covered in a sac, if I was all the way in the sac. I don't know if I came out with the fluid still in the sac, because I've seen videos with, babies being born and they're still in the sac with the fluid in the sac. I don't know, the full details of my story, but I do know enough to know that I was born with a veil, which means that is a special child. So my dad said, wow. And I guess he was in shock. And with that piece of information, mom wakes up, she's recovering. She asks, what did we have? He says, we had a girl. And she says, oh, well, what are we going to name her? He said, I've already named her. Her name is going to be Angel, based off of that wives' tale, with the baby being born in a sack. With the veil, being a special child. So that's how I got my name. I also want to say that I've always been a person that I can identify that I've been a protected child or a protected person since a very young age. And I'm saying that because I've had so many encounters, supernatural encounters. I've had a very strong belief system since a very young age. Didn't necessarily understand what it was then, but as I've matured and I've definitely developed spiritually and gotten closer to God, I can now sit back and reflect and say, wow, he has always been there. He has always been there with me since day one. And I can go dive a little deeper into that in later episodes, and share a little more experiences with my spirituality as from infancy. I'm going to say from infancy to being a toddler, to being an adolescence, and up into my adult years. Just share those, supernatural experience with you at a later date, because I've had quite a few supernatural experiences. And to my non-believers, I have to sit here and say, it definitely is a God, you know, and I'm definitely heavily protected, heavily protected. With that stated, going back into the relationship that I've had with my ex, there were several instances where we had some very intense moments, very intense physical moments. However, as stated in the previous videos, I love this man. I loved him. And, you know, he gave me something that I've never experienced before from parents. He's the first relationship that I've ever pursued. So yeah, I just did not want to let it go. And I felt as though, like, if I did walk away and let it go, would I experience love again? So that's where my fear and doubt came in. And I'm at the ripe age of 17 at this time, you know, and I'm fearing being alone and not experiencing love. And, you know, I felt as though this was the only person that I could receive, you know, or just to have this type of experience with a relationship or with love in my life. And I don't know, you know, even as I reflect on it right now and I'm talking about it, I don't even know why I had that thought process. You know, like why didn't I think that I had options? You know, so that's where I'm going with that. I don't know why I didn't think I had options, but for some reason I did not. And my ex and I, we had some deep conversations. He shared more about his past. I shared more about mine. And, you know, he had more access to me and my family. So he's, you know, in my home, watching the interactions between mom, sister, brother, father, you know, other relatives. He's watching those type of interactions and he's doing his homework. And I'll dive into that a little bit deeper, you know, in episodes to come. But through our conversations, we started talking about, you know, how we wanted to experience love. And we started talking about parenting and the way we were raised. And we started having discussions on, you know, how we would be if we were to become parents. And we started having discussions about, like, at 17, wanting to be a parent, just so we can show our parents or guardians for him how parenting is supposed to be done. So here we are, 17 years old, having that discussion on planning a family, starting a family together. Okay, so we already have this dysfunction in our relationship, this abuse that's not even being talked about. You know, I'm not disclosing it to anybody. And yeah, now we're talking about developing a family together. Okay. And of course, you know, in the last video, I told you by this time, at 17, we're already sexually active. You know, I've already given him my virginity. And I'm like, you know, the way I was raised, the first person that you get with needs to be your husband. So I'm like, okay, wow, we already did this. And we're having conversations about now getting married and planning a family. So we do things a little bit out of order. We haven't graduated yet. We're still in school, and we are physically practicing to start a family. And we thought it was going to be easy. You know, we thought it was going to be extremely easy to get pregnant. So we're trying and trying. and trying month after month after month after month. And we've had so many negative attempts, failed attempts. You know, as I think back on it, I'm just like, wow, I was 17. I was 17 and I'm trying to have a family just so I can experience real love, so to speak, right? Like I love him, yes, but you hear people talk all the time about not experiencing real love until you become a mom. So at 17 years old, I'm wanting to experience this. And this man, this boy wants the same exact thing. So here we are trying to start a family. A year goes by, no baby. So 18, no baby. Finally get pregnant at the age of 19. At the age of 19. And it's funny how this actually happened, because we were not in the best of places in our relationship. And I was ready to actually break it off. I had come to a realization that I did not want to be with this guy. And I was like, okay, yeah, I didn't want to continue to go through what it was that we were going through. So I went ahead and made arrangements to spend our last night together. Oh my, thinking back on it, I can smile now, but I was young. That saying, young and dumb. Boy, was I young, dumb. Well, I'm not even gonna say dumb, just young, inexperienced, the lack of knowledge, the lack of direction. Woo, that's all I can say. So I planned to break up with this man on this one particular day. But over that weekend, I was like, okay, this is going to be the last time we actually get together in an intimate way, sexual way. So we get a hotel, and that experience was quite unique. It was just a series of events that transpired, whereas I was like, yeah, this is it. He's not appealing to me anymore. I can't seem to get pregnant. I thought that I had an infertility problem. And I thought maybe I could not have children because it was not happening. Already from 17 to 19, I was trying and it just did not happen. So we go to the hotel, a series of events transpired. We did have sexual intercourse that day. We go home Sunday, I'm like, yeah, no, that was just the weirdest experience ever. I've confirmed this is it. I'm just over it. I'm done. And now at this time, I'm working. I'm working for the DC government at that time. And I said, I'm not going to work tomorrow. I'm going to make it happen tomorrow. Like, it was like strong in my spirit that I needed to break it off with him that following day, which was the Monday. So I ended up calling off work. And I was like, if I was to call off, I know I needed a medical excuse or an excuse not to show up to work. So I wanted to make sure I had that. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go to the urgent care or emergency room at that time. I said, I'm gonna go to the emergency room and I'm just gonna let them know that I'm, experiencing some abdominal cramps or, just something to be seen, and get that excuse note so I can give it to my employer the following day, right? So I get to the emergency room And they're asking questions, routine questions when you're going in triage, like when was your last cycle? And I told them, I was like, I haven't had it in a couple of months. And it was like, oh, well, is that normal? I'm like, oh yeah, that's normal. Don't worry about that. My cycle's never, I'm irregular. I said it comes a couple months and then it just disappears for a couple months. It comes and then it disappears for a couple months. So they're like, oh, okay. And then they're asking me, well, are you feeling a little nauseous, like tired? Do you get frequent headaches? They're just asking routine questions. And I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, well, yeah. So they say, do you think you're pregnant? And I said, no, because as I just stated, I have irregular cycles. So no, I don't think I am pregnant. They say, okay, well, we are just going to go ahead and just run a test anyway. I said, okay, the urine one. It was like, well, you can take a urine test, but we want to do a blood one as well. So they did the blood pregnancy test and the urine. The urine came back negative. They ran an IV. They gave me a line and they said, just have a seat in the waiting room and we'll call you back as soon as the room is available when your results come in or whatever. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they had me go back into the waiting room until they called me again. And I said, okay. So I go out and he's sitting there. And as I'm looking at him, I'm just like, oh God, I hope this, I didn't expect that to happen. I just thought they were going to get me in a room, say, oh, okay, nothing's wrong with you, you're fine or whatever. So I'm in the waiting room for like an hour and then, or maybe an hour and a half. And then they call me to the back and I come back and the nurse says, so we ran some tests. And she's talking like that. We ran some tests. And I'm like, okay. And she says, this came back this way, that came back this way. She said, but your pregnancy test. I said, oh my God. I'm looking, I'm like, yes, it's negative, right? She said, yeah, your urine came back negative. She said, but your blood test came back positive. She said, so congratulations. These are the symptoms that, this explains why you're experiencing the symptoms that you're experiencing. And I'm sitting here like, I was in shock. I don't think I spoke for like 2 or 3 minutes. I just know I was quiet. And so as I'm quiet, she's like, are you okay? I'm like, are you sure that's my blood? Did you switch the vials? Like, this can't happen. I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm about to break up with this guy, like, as soon as I leave here. I didn't say this to her, but this is what I'm thinking. And I'm just like, no. I said, are you sure that's my test? So she's like, yeah, this is definitely your test. There's no mistake about it. You are pregnant. And she says, well, are you going to tell the father? I said, wow, I'm quiet. She says, well, do you want to have it? And I said, and I'm sitting here like, yeah, I definitely want my baby, but I'm not sure if I want the guy, and she looks at me, she goes, huh? And then she said, well, how are you going to tell him? I said, well, I'm going to have to tell him because he's here. She says, he's here? I said, he's in the waiting room. She says, well, okay, I'm going to give you a minute. She says, you go back out. She said, either you can tell him or, you have him come back here because we have to do something. We can't just discharge you right now. So he's probably going to find out before you leave the hospital today anyway. And I said, wow, okay. So I said, let me go and get him and bring him back and we can just have that discussion. So I remember going back into the waiting room and having a seat beside him. And he said, so what's wrong? And I just sat down and I don't think I said anything for a while. And I just said, wow. I said, so all my tests came back. He said, what? And he said, you pregnant. You pregnant, huh? You pregnant. And I was like, wow. I said, just come on back. He said, I already know you're pregnant. I already know. And I was like, wow, it was just so interesting because I'm like, I really didn't want to be with this man anymore. I really wanted to break it off. And I'm just like, God, are you telling me? I took that as a sign, God saying, stay with them. Don't break up with him, So now my mind is, I guess, I don't know. I felt like my mind was just all over the place at that time. Could have potentially been playing tricks on me. I don't know. But we ended up going to the back. Moments after we got to the back, doctor comes in and confirms. I look at my ex and he's looking a little nervous. Another doctor comes in and says that they have to give, what the next steps were. They needed to do a sonogram, see how far I was. And they had to give me a, insert a Foley because I guess my bladder needed to be full or whatever. So they explained those procedures to us. And they went through with it. Now this was quite scary because we go back, they prepared me to put the Foley in. And that was my first time getting one. And they filled it up with all this fluid and bladder felt like it was going to explode. That was the most uncomfortable experience that I've ever had at 19, right? Well, I guess I was, 19. Oh, Jesus. So, sorry, I had a moment. I was just thinking, going back down memory lane. Well, they're looking and they can't find the baby. So now that moment of excitement is starting to turn into a scary moment for us, right? So gosh, they're doing a sonogram. Haven't had my cycle in like 3 months. And you telling me I'm pregnant, but you can't see the baby. Wow. Now, the symptoms that I came in with was abdominal pains and, all this other stuff. So now they're like, okay, well, you came in with these symptoms, but they were false symptoms. I was feeling fine. I just wanted to break up with my ex to find out that I'm pregnant. And they're like, well, you came in with abdominal pains and this and that. And they're like, well, maybe you had a miscarriage and the baby just hasn't, passed yet. It's passing and that's why we can't see it. And I'm like, nah, like I wasn't feeling that in my spirit. So I was just like, no, I'm not accepting that. And then the technician goes out, she brings another technician in and she's looking and she's like, I don't see anything. And so they're like, we think you had a miscarriage. And my ex, I look at him, he looking at me, he's like, he has like one eyebrow up and I'm just looking at him and I don't know what to think at this moment. I'm like, but my spirit was not telling me that I had a miscarriage. So we go back. No, they go out and one of the technicians come back in and she says, I was looking at your chart. She says, now it's either one or two things. She said, your urine test did come back negative. She said, but I'm looking at the numbers in your blood test. It did come back positive. She said, but your quants are 16. That's the count. She says, your quants are 16. She says, so either you just got pregnant, like literally a day or two ago, or you lost the baby. She said, now you said you haven't had a cycle in like 3 months, right? I said, correct. She said, so if you were having a miscarriage, you would know you're having a miscarriage. There'll be blood, there'll be excruciating pain, like you wouldn't be this calm right now. She says, so I'm thinking you just got pregnant. And I said, wow, I had my aha moment. So I'm just like, wow. It just so happens, this so-called last experience I wanted to have with my ex was the experience that I conceived, that we conceived my first child. Interesting. So she says, here's what you can do. We can either schedule you for a D&C today to clean your uterus out, because the doctors are thinking that you had a miscarriage, or you can wait a while. She said, we can discharge you today. You can go home. If you had a miscarriage or you're having a miscarriage, you will go home. You will experience, she said the process of a miscarriage is going to continue. You will experience heavy pain, heavy bleeding, or severe pain and heavy bleeding and so forth. She says, I would advise you to just find you an OB, let them test you, get a sonogram in another couple of weeks. They should be able to see something. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that option because I really don't feel like I'm having a miscarriage. She says, okay. She said, that's the best advice I can give you. She said, because the doctor and all of them, they're ready to go up and prepare you for OR to just do a D&C. And I was like, wow. I said, okay. She says, let me go and tell them right now, this is your decision. She said, you sure this is what you wanted? I said, yeah, wait. And I'm going to find me a doctor and I'm going to get a second opinion. She says, okay. So she went out, had that conversation. Doctor comes back in, counsels us again, consults us again. And he's like, okay, are you sure this is what you want to do? Because I believe that you done had a miscarriage. He says, your numbers are low. We can't see the baby. You haven't had a period in 3 months. So you were probably pregnant and the baby is, just needs to pass through. I'm just like, no, let me go home and I'm going to figure this thing out. So I leave and we have the conversation in the car was just like, wow. I asked him, I said, so what do you think? I said, you think I lost the baby? He says, no. He says, you would know. He says, I've seen people have miscarriages. He says, you're not in any pain. He said, you know how your body is, your cycles come and then they go for a couple of months. He's like, no. He said, I think you're really pregnant. He said, I think you probably just got pregnant on Saturday. And here it is Monday. And that's why the numbers are so low. We just got pregnant. I'm like, wow. He says, yeah, let's go home. Let's find us a doctor. He had a cousin that was pregnant. So she gave us her doctor's information. And because I'm now getting nervous because I'm like, oh my God, I'm still living at home with mom. And, now I'm getting scared. At 17, I'm trying to have a kid. And here I am, 19, I'm really pregnant. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? I can't go to my mom with this, so I went ahead, called the doctor. Doctor had an appointment like 3 weeks from that phone call. I went in. She did the urine and confirmed that I was pregnant through urine and blood and scheduled me for a sonogram, which was in another 3 weeks. So I go have a sonogram that 3 weeks later. And here we see as soon as they put the monitor or the Doppler on my lower abdomen, you see this little sac and this little thing in there, just this life form kicking and punching and stretching, and there's a life growing inside of me. So what doctors were trying to excrete from my body through a D&C, they were going, it was an actual life. I actually did conceive that Saturday. And that's why I stayed. That's why I decided to stay. Because we finally got what we set out to do. We were now pregnant. And now that we were pregnant, we both started to get a little scared. We got scared. I'm not gonna lie. He never came out and confessed that he was afraid, but I knew he was afraid. Heck, I was afraid. We asked. It took a long time, but we got it. We are now officially pregnant. Now what? What's next on the horizon for us? Heart's racing. I see this little baby on the monitor. The technician confirms that I'm 11 weeks pregnant. I'm 11 weeks pregnant and I'm having a baby. And I look at him and he looks at me and we're speechless. We are having a baby. 19. Now I'm scared.